The morning air over Albuquerque carried a faint chill, the kind that slipped into the bones before the sun had fully warmed the desert floor. Teresa Sandoval, bundled in her light travel jacket, had asked the taxi driver to turn back only 10 minutes after leaving for the airport. She had searched her purse twice, then her carry-on, then the glove box of her memory, and finally realized the truth. Her passport was still sitting in the drawer of her bedroom desk, exactly where she'd placed it the night before. It annoyed her, mostly because she prided herself on being organized. She rarely forgot anything. But she tried to soften the frustration with a small laugh as the taxi stopped in front of her stucco home in North Valley. 66, and still rushing out the door like a teenager, she murmured. She told the driver she'd only be a minute and stepped out quietly, careful not to draw attention. Adriana and Scott had insisted on driving her to the airport, but Teresa had declined. She didn't want to inconvenience anyone. Now, that choice suddenly felt like a blessing. She slipped around the side of the house and let herself in through the back door. It was habit. Teresa always preferred quiet entrances. The kitchen lights were off. The house still. She padded across the tile, shoes silent, and headed toward the stairs leading up to her bedroom. She reached the landing when she heard voices drifting in from the open window overlooking the backyard patio. Her daughter's voice came first, soft, tense. "Scott, we have to move forward with this. If she keeps traveling alone, people will think she's fine." Then Scott's voice, low but sharper. "She is fine. That's the problem. She's too healthy. She could live another 10, 15 years. We can't wait that long, Adriana." Teresa's hand tightened around the banister. For a moment, she wondered if she had misheard them. Surely they weren't talking about her. "Surely," Adriana whispered. Dr. Mercer agreed to help. He said, "He'll document the cognitive decline symptoms. Once that's in writing, the court won't question it." A slow numbness spread through Teresa's limbs. Her daughter, her own daughter. Scott continued, unbothered. "Once the guardianship petition is approved, we'll have full control. The house, her accounts, everything. Then we can get her into the facility. Somewhere quiet, maybe in Rio Rancho. Places like that don't ask many questions." Teresa's heartbeat stuttered. She pressed her back against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. They weren't talking about helping her. They weren't worried about her safety. They were planning her removal, as if she were an obstacle to be cleared, a burden to be placed out of sight. Adriana sounded conflicted. She's still my mom." Scott didn't hesitate. "And she's standing in the way of our life. She wanders around that big house alone, clinging to the past. It's not safe for her or us." The world tilted. Teresa felt the hallway sway around her, felt the floor stretch into something unfamiliar. For a moment, she thought she might faint, but years of quiet resilience held her upright. She stayed absolutely still, listening. Not a single floorboard creaked under her weight. Scott concluded, "She's losing things, forgetting things. We'll make sure people notice. It won't be hard." Adriana didn't respond. Silence settled like dust. Teresa swallowed, forcing down the rising panic. The betrayal was sharp, a clean wound carved into the center of her chest. Disbelief tangled with fear until she could no longer separate the two. She backed away slowly, step by cautious step, making no sound at all. They could not know she heard. They could not know she had returned. Not yet. She steadied herself on the edge of the stair rail, drew a long, trembling breath, and slipped back down the stairs with the same quiet grace she had entered, her heart fractured, her world forever changed. Teresa didn't dare move from her spot at the top of the stairs. The window remained open, the wind carrying every word straight to her. She felt suspended in place, as if any movement might shatter the thin thread holding her together. Adriana's voice came first, hesitant but clear enough to carve into her mother's heart. We need to be consistent. If people around her start noticing things, the court will have no reason to question it. Scott exhaled with impatience. Exactly. We start small. Neighbors first. Martha already thinks she repeats herself, so we lean into that. Tell her mom keeps asking the same questions, or telling the same story twice in one visit. A rush of heat rose to Teresa's face. She had spoken to Martha just last week. A normal conversation about the new rose bushes in the yard. There had been no confusion, no repetition, nothing remotely close to what Scott was describing. Adriana added softly, and with Joan, I already told her mom forgot her birthday lunch last month. She didn't, but Joan sounded worried. Teresa's throat tightened. Joan Castillo had been her closest friend for nearly 20 years. Book club partner, confidant, the person who delivered soup when Teresa had the flu. To think that Adriana had twisted something so personal, so cherished, made Teresa's knees weaken. Scott continued, more animated now. Perfect. The more people believe she's slipping, the easier it'll be when Dr. Mercer files his evaluation. And her medication? Adriana's voice shook slightly. That's simple, Scott replied without hesitation. Move the pill organizer. Set it in a different room. Hide 1 or 2 doses if she gets dizzy or feels off balance. It supports the narrative. She won't think twice. She'll blame her age. A wave of nausea rolled through Teresa. She steadied herself with a hand on the wall, fingers pressing against the cool paint. Medications weren't something to toy with. She took her blood pressure pills every morning and evening, on time, carefully. The idea of anyone tampering with them was more than cruel. It was dangerous. Adriana whispered, It feels wrong, Scott. He stepped closer. Teresa could hear the faint crunch of gravel beneath his shoe. It isn't wrong. You're protecting her future and ours. Think about how much easier life will be when we can finally settle things. No more worrying if she falls. No more unexpected travel. No more hoarding old paperwork from your father. She'll be safe, and we'll have control to manage things properly. Adriana stayed silent. Scott pushed harder, his tone slipping into familiar condescension. You're overthinking it. She's already showing signs, forgetting things, losing things. We're just documenting reality. Documenting reality. The phrase lodged in Teresa's chest like a splinter. She sifted through recent moments in her mind. Adriana insisting on sorting her mail to help. Scott criticizing how she labeled her storage bins. The sudden push for her to stop driving. The suggestion that she should simplify her home and give them access to her accounts for emergencies. Every gesture she'd taken as concern. Every offer to help. Every question about her finances wasn't kindness at all. It was scaffolding for a lie. The suffocating dread pressed harder, making each breath shallow. Trust, once the solid foundation of her relationship with her only daughter, cracked beneath her feet. Adriana finally spoke again, voice thin. I just don't want her to hate me. She won't, Scott assured. She won't even understand what's happening. That's the point. Teresa felt something inside her tremble, then fall still, like a door quietly shutting. She no longer recognized the daughter below her. The child she raised with late-night homework help and warm meals had become a stranger, standing beside a man who knew exactly how to manipulate her. The conversation drifted into silence, but Teresa no longer needed to hear more. The betrayal had already taken shape, full, unmistakable, and devastating. And in that silence, her trust collapsed completely, leaving only dread and the faint stir of something else deep inside her, a beginning she could not yet name. Teresa didn't remember walking down the stairs. Her feet moved on instinct, guided more by shock than awareness. The walls of the house seemed to pulse around her, colors blurring at the edges. When she reached the back door, her hand trembled so violently she had to steady it against the frame before pushing it open. The yard looked the same, sun warming the gravel, cottonwoods whispering in the breeze, but something inside her had shattered irreversibly. She slipped around the side of the house, heart pounding, praying Adriana and Scott wouldn't glance up and see her retreating shape. Every breath felt thin, strained. By the time she reached the taxi waiting at the curb, her vision had begun to tunnel. The driver stepped out, concerned. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Teresa forced a nod, gripping the edge of the car door to keep herself upright. "Just lightheaded. I'll be fine." Her voice didn't sound like her own. She collapsed into the back seat, hands closing around her purse as if it were an anchor, keeping her from drifting into nothingness. The betrayal replayed in her head, each sentence, each whisper, each word from her daughter and son-in-law slicing through her again and again. Her daughter's voice, her own daughter. The taxi pulled away from the curb, and Teresa pressed her forehead against the window, cold glass grounding her. For a fleeting moment, she considered telling the driver to turn around, cancel the entire trip, stay home, confront them, demand answers. But the thought dissolved as quickly as it surfaced. If they knew she'd overheard them, they would change their plan. They would hide everything. They would pretend innocence. And she would be left with nothing except her own word against theirs, and no protection. No, she had to go through with the trip. Let them believe she was oblivious. Let them think their plan was unfolding exactly as they intended. When the taxi reached the airport, Teresa moved through the terminal as if underwater. Security lines, boarding calls, the recorded voice announcing last passengers. It all blurred into background noise, distant and hollow. She walked with slow steps, each one carefully placed, steadying her trembling body through sheer force of will. On the plane, as the engines roared to life, memories flooded her. Waves she couldn't stop. Adriana as a toddler, clinging to her leg while learning to walk. Adriana at 9, crying over a scraped knee that Teresa patched with gentle hands. Adriana at 17, excitedly showing her the acceptance letter to UNM. And later, Adriana introducing Scott, a polite, charming man who seemed attentive, respectful, almost too perfect. Teresa remembered the unease she dismissed, the small red flags she waved away, Scott's subtle comments about her old-fashioned habits, his laughs when she misheard a word, his insistence that Adriana needed boundaries from her. She had brushed them aside for years, believing love required patience. But the truth stood clear now, sharp as New Mexico sunlight. She was not losing her mind. She was being targeted. The flight landed hours later, and Teresa boarded the cruise ship with a stiffness she couldn't shake. The ship glided away from the harbor, sun setting behind it, painting the water in shades of copper and rose. Teresa leaned on the railing, watching the ripples break and reform, her chest heavy. For the next 5 days, she kept to herself, meals taken quietly, walks along the deck alone, evenings spent staring at the ocean's endless horizon. She cried once, silently into her pillow, but the rest of the time she thought. She thought about what she heard. She thought about what she needed. She thought about what they were willing to do. By the third night, something settled inside her, a stillness, a clarity. She couldn't confront them yet, not without proof, not without allies, not without a plan strong enough to withstand whatever Scott had already prepared. But she would not be the quiet victim they expected. Somewhere between heartbreak and the open water, Teresa felt a small, fierce spark ignite deep within her, a spark of resolve that would only grow stronger once she returned home. When Teresa stepped through her front door 5 days later, the house felt different. Not visibly. Everything looked mostly as she left it, but the air itself seemed unsettled, as if the walls remembered what had occurred in her absence. She set her luggage aside, took a slow breath, and began to walk through the rooms one by one. It didn't take long. The first sign was subtle, a drawer in the hallway cabinet left open by half an inch. Teresa always closed it completely. Always. She ran her fingers along the edge before gently pushing it shut. In the living room, a stack of mail she had sorted before her trip was now crooked. Envelopes shifted. A decorative bowl on the side table had been rotated slightly off-center. In her bedroom, one of her jewelry boxes sat a full inch away from where she had placed it. They had been here. Scott and Adriana had entered her home, maybe more than once, searching, cataloging, preparing, and they expected her to be too distracted, too old, or too confused to notice. Teresa stood in the center of her room, spine straightening with quiet resolve. She would give them exactly what they expected for now. Moments later, when Adriana called to check in, Teresa softened her voice, letting it wobble just enough to sound unsure. "Oh, honey, I'm a little tired. I think I left some things out of place. I must have been rushing before the trip." Adriana eagerly reassured her, almost too quickly. "It's okay, Mom. It happens at your age. Do you want me to come help organize?" Teresa forced a small laugh. "That's sweet, but I'll manage." She hung up, hands steadying around her phone. If they wanted to treat her like she was slipping, she would let them, but she would not let their lie consume her. The next morning, Teresa drove to a small electronics shop off Central Avenue. She browsed quietly, selecting 3 discrete audio recorders, 2 disguised as USB drives and 1 as a key fob. New Mexico was a one-party consent state. She didn't need permission to record anyone. They had chosen the wrong woman to underestimate. With the devices tucked safely in her purse, she drove downtown to meet attorney Miguel Alvarez. Miguel had been one of her husband's closest friends, sharp-eyed, principled, and unshakably loyal. His office was lined with legal books and framed certificates, sunlight bouncing off the polished tile floor when Teresa stepped inside. He stood the moment he saw her. "Teresa, you look pale. What happened?" She told him everything, every word she overheard, every lie Adriana repeated to Joan, every drawer out of place, every plan Scott laid out in the backyard. Miguel didn't interrupt. His jaw clenched tighter with each detail, eyes narrowing behind his glasses. When she finished, he exhaled slowly. "This is elder exploitation," he said, "and guardianship fraud. If they succeed in filing anything, you could lose control of your home, your finances, even your freedom. You came to me just in time." Teresa's hands trembled slightly. "I can't believe my own daughter." Miguel placed a reassuring hand over hers. "Right now, emotions have to wait. We need evidence. Hard evidence. Enough to shut this down before it goes anywhere near a courtroom." They discussed strategy for nearly an hour. Miguel outlined the steps, document everything, record every suspicious conversation, photograph anything out of place, save voicemails, texts, bank notices. Never confront directly, not yet. "Once we have enough," he said firmly, "we bring in a private investigator, and then we take this apart piece by piece." Teresa left the office with a folder of instructions and a mind sharper than it had been in years. Back home, she began her quiet work. She photographed moved items. She wrote dates and notes in a small notebook. She recorded calls. She checked her bank app twice a day. Fear hovered close, but it no longer paralyzed her. It focused her. They expected her to be confused. Instead, she was becoming methodical, watching, documenting, and preparing for the moment the truth would turn sharply in her favor. The first time Teresa noticed Scott's disappearances, it was only a faint tug of curiosity, an offhand remark about meetings that didn't align with his work schedule, a hurried shower before leaving the house. The way he silenced his phone whenever Adriana wasn't looking. She had dismissed those signs for years. Adriana loved him. Teresa assumed that meant he was trustworthy. But now, everything lived beneath a harsher light. Once she began documenting, tracking, and quietly observing, patterns emerged. Scott frequently slipped out during lunch hours. He disappeared on weekends with vague explanations. And always he kept his phone face down. Teresa brought these notes to attorney Miguel Alvarez. Miguel steepled his fingers thoughtfully. If he's hiding money or relationships, we need to know. Exploitation like this rarely happens in isolation. I'll bring in someone who can guide you. That someone was Detective Naomi Harper. Naomi was in her late 30s, sharp-eyed, soft-spoken, with a calm professionalism that reassured Teresa in a way few people could. "We do this slowly," Naomi said, flipping open a small notebook. "You'll follow at a distance. I'll handle the close work. We don't want him suspecting anything." So, Teresa found herself sitting in her car on a Wednesday afternoon, parked 2 streets away from a cafe in Nob Hill. She watched Scott's SUV pull up 10 minutes after he'd told Adriana he had a client meeting. Her heart thudded with a mix of tension and dread. Naomi's voice came through the phone softly. "Stay in your car. I've got him." Teresa watched from a safe distance as Naomi, camera hidden under a scarf, walked past the cafe window. Scott sat at an outdoor table, relaxed, smiling in a way Teresa rarely saw at family dinners. Across from him sat a woman Teresa didn't recognize. Early 30s, dark hair, warm eyes. Next to her, 2 children, one about 8, the other maybe 6, leaned against Scott with the comfort of familiarity. Then came the moment that hollowed Teresa out completely. The youngest child climbed into Scott's lap and wrapped tiny arms around his neck. "Daddy, you came." "Daddy." The word slammed into Teresa's ribs with the force of a physical blow. Her breath caught in her throat. She gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened, tears rising before she could stop them. Naomi, now hidden behind a row of parked cars, snapped photo after photo. Scott hugging the children. Scott kissing the woman's temple. Scott handing her an envelope of cash. Scott promising, "I'll come back this weekend. I swear." Every image was a dagger. Teresa bit her lip to keep from crying out. Adriana, her sweet Adriana, had no idea. She wasn't just being manipulated. She had been living inside Scott's double life for years, used as a financial foundation while he supported an entirely separate family in secret. When Naomi slid back into the passenger seat of Teresa's car, she exhaled softly. "This is significant. I'll send everything to Miguel." Teresa nodded, unable to speak. The betrayal toward her was already unbearable, but the betrayal toward Adriana, her daughter, her only child, ripped something deeper, something primal inside her. Back at home, Teresa sat across from Miguel in his office. Photos spread across the desk like scattered shards. Miguel reviewed them, slowly, jaw tightening. "This is bigger than guardianship," he said at last, voice low. "This is fraud, Teresa. Manipulation. Financial entanglement. He's bleeding 2 households dry, yours included." Teresa closed her eyes, letting the truth settle. It hurt. It burned. But beneath the devastation, something steadier began to form, a structure of resolve rising from the debris. Miguel continued, "We don't act yet. Not until we have everything. When Scott falls, he needs to fall so completely he can't claw his way out." Teresa inhaled deeply. Devastation still pressed heavily on her chest, but now woven through it was a thin, deliberate strand of strength, the kind built quietly, steadily, by someone who had decided she would not be destroyed. Not by lies, not by manipulation, not by the man who had underestimated her all along. The house was silent when Teresa placed the small audio recorder beneath the edge of the living room bookshelf. She had grown used to hiding them, one in the kitchen, one near the hallway, another disguised as a charger in the guest room. Each device blended into the background like a harmless piece of clutter. No one suspected a thing. That afternoon, Adriana and Scott arrived unannounced, letting themselves in with the spare key Scott insisted on holding for emergencies. Teresa greeted them with her practiced softness, voice slightly uncertain, smile faintly distracted, while her heart hammered beneath the performance. After a few minutes of polite chatter, Teresa excused herself to fold laundry in the back bedroom. But she didn't fold anything. She stood just out of sight, recorder app open on her phone, and listened. Scott's voice reached her first, low and forceful. "You didn't do it. I saw the pillbox when I walked in. It's exactly where she left it." Adriana sounded defensive. "I couldn't, Scott. She was watching me. I didn't know how to hide anything without her noticing." "You don't have to hide everything," he insisted, tone sharp yet calculated. "Just 1 or 2 pills. Or move the organizer somewhere odd, the fridge, a cabinet, anywhere she wouldn't think to look. If she misses a dose or 2, she'll get dizzy, confused. It's natural at her age." Teresa felt her breath freeze in her chest. She pressed a hand over her mouth to stop herself from making a sound. Adriana whispered, "But what if it hurts her?" Scott scoffed lightly. "It won't kill her, Adriana. Stop being dramatic. She'll just seem forgetful, a little off. That's exactly what we need for the petition. If Dr. Mercer sees inconsistencies in her cognitive baseline—" "I know," Adriana cut in quietly. "I know. I'm just scared." Scott softened his tone, the way Teresa had seen him do countless times when he wanted something. "You're doing this for us, for our future, for her, too. She shouldn't be living alone. This is helping everyone." A long pause. Teresa stood completely still, heart sinking with each second of silence. She prayed desperately that her daughter would say no. Then Adriana's voice broke through, small and defeated. "Okay, I'll do it tomorrow." The words landed like a physical blow. Teresa slipped into the bathroom, closed the door silently, and sank to the floor. The tile felt cold against her trembling palms. Tears fell freely, her chest tightening with the kind of pain she hadn't felt since the day she buried her husband. But this was different. This was betrayal by blood, an ache that hollowed her from the inside out. She cried without sound, the only release she could afford, while the 2 people plotting against her stood in her living room, discussing her life as if she were an object to be managed. When she finally composed herself, she returned to her bedroom, retrieved the recorder, and transferred the audio file to her phone with trembling fingers. She listened once, just once, to confirm every word was clear. It was that night. She sent the recording to Miguel. Within minutes, he called. His voice was hard, controlled. "Teresa, this is it. This is enough. This alone could put Scott behind bars for elder abuse and attempted medical tampering. Combined with everything else, the case is airtight." Her breath shook as she answered. "He asked her to poison me." "He asked her to incapacitate you," Miguel corrected gently. "And she agreed. That matters legally. Detective Harper and I will finalize the intervention plan." Teresa closed her eyes. The emotional collapse still lived inside her, raw and painful, but beneath it, something had ignited. The spark from the cruise had grown into a steady flame, one fueled not by revenge, but by survival, by the righteous fury of a woman who had been pushed past her limit. They thought she would break. Instead, she was becoming unstoppable. Teresa chose a quiet afternoon for the confrontation. One of those warm Albuquerque days when the sun softened the air and shadows stretched lazily across the porch. She set out a tray of tea and shortbread cookies, her movements calm, deliberate. Everything about the scene looked ordinary, almost peaceful. Only Teresa knew how carefully crafted it was. When Adriana arrived, she seemed distracted, wringing her hands slightly as she stepped into the kitchen. "Mom, you didn't have to make tea. I just wanted to check on you." Teresa offered a gentle smile. "I thought it would be nice to sit together. It's been a long week for both of us." She motioned toward the small table by the window. As they settled in, the clink of porcelain filled the brief silence. Teresa studied her daughter's face, nervous, fidgety, unable to hold eye contact. It confirmed what Teresa already suspected. Guilt was already eating her alive. She began softly, her tone light. "Sweetheart, I was looking for a bracelet this morning, the silver one your father gave me years ago." She stirred her tea casually. "I can't find it anywhere. Have you seen it?" Adriana's reaction was immediate. Her shoulders tensed. Her eyes darted to the counter. "Oh, no, Mom. Maybe you misplaced it? You've been traveling, and things get moved around." Teresa nodded slowly, accepting the lie without challenge. "Maybe. Though I usually keep it in the same place." Adriana took a shaky sip of tea. Teresa's next question slipped out just as gently. "And I noticed Dr. Mercer called while I was gone. Something about a follow-up evaluation." She tilted her head thoughtfully. "I don't remember scheduling anything." Adriana froze mid-sip. Her voice came out thin. "Oh, that must have been a mix-up. I asked him to check on you. You've seemed stressed lately." "Without telling me?" Teresa asked softly. With no anger, only curiosity. "It's unlike you to make appointments on my behalf." Adriana's breath hitched. "I was just trying to help, Mom." Teresa let the silence stretch, warm but heavy. She reached for a cookie, breaking it calmly. "One more thing. I was curious about a document I found in the trash, the one labeled Petition for Incapacitation. It looked like something from the county court website." Adriana went completely still. A flush crept up her neck. "Mom, I can explain." "I'm listening," Teresa said, voice smooth, almost kind. It was the softness that seemed to unnerve Adriana the most. Her daughter's words stumbled out in fragments. "Scott said we were just trying to be prepared. You've been forgetful. And he thought it would be good to understand the process. Just in case." Teresa watched her carefully. The lies were fragile now, cracking at the edges. "Prepared," she echoed. "For what exactly?" Adriana swallowed hard. "Nothing. It was hypothetical. I swear." Teresa offered a small, reassuring smile, the kind that hid storms beneath its surface. "Of course, darling. I'm sure you meant well." Adriana blinked, confusion clouding her eyes. She had expected anger, an outburst, accusations, something loud enough to match her guilt. But Teresa remained calm, grounded, unshaken, and that unsettled her more than anything else. As Adriana gathered her purse to leave, she looked back at her mother, face pale. "Mom, are you okay?" Teresa held her gaze. "I'm perfectly fine." Adriana nodded, but her hands trembled as she opened the door. She walked out slowly, as if expecting something to fall apart behind her. She didn't know it yet, but something was unraveling. Just not from Teresa's side. The knock didn't come. Scott didn't believe in knocking. Teresa heard the deadbolt turn, the door shove open, and heavy footsteps storm straight into the foyer. He moved through the house as if he owned it, an arrogance she no longer had to pretend not to see. "Teresa," he barked, "we need to talk. Now." She stepped out of the kitchen calmly, holding a neat stack of papers in her hands. "I immagine vedo." Scott froze when he saw her waiting, unshaken, collected. His expression flickered with something like annoyance before settling into a sneer. "Where's Adriana? She said you were acting strange." Adriana stood behind him, pale and hesitant, wringing her hands. She looked like she hadn't slept since their tea. "Mom, maybe we should all just sit," Teresa said quietly. Something in her voice, steady, resolute, made even Scott pause. He scoffed but lowered himself into the armchair. Adriana sat on the edge of the couch, as if afraid the cushions might collapse beneath her guilt. Teresa placed the stack of papers on the coffee table. "These arrived in my mailbox," she lied gently, "and I think you should see them." Scott's gaze flicked down, uninterested, until he saw the first photograph. There he was, standing outside Café Sol in Nob Hill, Bianca leaning into him, his hand around her waist. 2 children, 1 girl, 1 boy, calling him daddy with wide, adoring smiles. Naomi's photos were crisp, irrefutable. Scott's face drained of color. "What is this?" Adriana whispered, voice trembling. Scott shot to his feet instantly. "Someone is framing me. This is Photoshop." Teresa handed him another photo. This time, Scott was hugging the little boy, lifting him off the ground with a tenderness Teresa had never seen him show Eli, Adriana's little nephew. Another photo, Scott kissing Bianca behind her car. Another, Scott handing an envelope of cash to her, smiling like a man living his real life somewhere Teresa's daughter didn't exist. Adriana clapped a hand over her mouth. "Scott, what is this?" He rounded on her, voice sharp and vicious. "I told you it's fake. Your mother is trying to tear us apart." Teresa didn't flinch. "There's more." She spread the full set across the table. Scott's face twisted, rage building under his skin like pressure beneath a cracking dam. "You think you can trap me?" he spat at Teresa. "You think some stupid pictures are enough to bring me down? You're a senile old woman who can't even remember where she put her own jewelry." Adriana's breath hitched. "Scott, stop." But he didn't. He turned on Teresa fully, venom spilling freely now that the facade had shattered. "You've been a burden since the day I married your daughter. Always meddling, always judging, always pretending you're some saint. You're pathetic, Teresa. You don't deserve that house, those savings. You don't even deserve to live on your own." The cruelty was naked now, not masked, not softened. The real Scott had stepped into the room. Adriana crumbled, sobbing into her hands. "Scott, please, this can't be true. Tell me you didn't lie to me. Tell me you're not living a whole other life." He snapped. "Adriana, shut up. You don't know anything. You never have." Something inside her shattered at those words. Teresa saw it the moment her daughter realized she hadn't just been manipulated. She had been discarded. Scott pounded a fist against the coffee table. "This is all your fault," he shouted at Teresa. "If you'd just cooperated, if you'd signed the damn papers, none of this would have." The doorbell rang. A sharp, authoritative sound that sliced through the chaos. Scott's rant halted mid-breath. Adriana lifted her tear-streaked face. Teresa didn't move, because she already knew who was on the other side of the door, and for the first time in weeks, she felt the ground shift in her favor. The crescendo was here, and the house was about to witness truth in full daylight. The doorbell rang again, firm, unmistakably official. Before Scott could bark another accusation, Teresa rose and walked to the foyer. She opened the door with steady hands. Attorney Miguel Alvarez stepped inside first, a leather briefcase tucked beneath his arm. Detective Naomi Harper followed, badge visible, her expression carved from absolute authority. Scott's face shifted from fury to confusion to something close to fear. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. Miguel didn't look at him. He addressed Teresa with calm professionalism. "We're here to finalize the intervention you authorized." Then he turned to Scott, eyes hard, "and to serve official notice." Naomi closed the door behind them. "Please sit down." "Mr. Rudd," she said evenly, "for your own benefit." Scott didn't sit. "You can't just barge in. This is harassment. Teresa invited me here." No, Teresa said quietly. You let yourself in, with a duplicate key you were never authorized to make. Naomi lifted a folder, which is one of the items listed in our documentation of unlawful entry. Adriana sat rigid on the couch, her face white. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. Mom, what's happening? Teresa placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Everything that needed to happen. Miguel opened his briefcase and spread several files across the coffee table, precise, organized, lethal in their clarity. These documents outline the events of the last 3 months, he said, including attempted guardianship fraud, forged medical notes prepared by Dr. Mercer, and a coordinated plan to declare Miss Sandoval legally incompetent. Adriana gasped, tears welling. Scott glared at her. Don't you say a word. Miguel ignored him and continued. We also have photographic evidence of your repeated unlawful entry into this home while Miss Sandoval was away, removal of personal property, and attempts at financial exploitation. Scott's voice cracked with panic. You don't know what you're talking about. Adriana, tell them. Tell them you consented. Adriana shook her head, whispering, I didn't know. I didn't know any of this. Naomi laid out another folder. We also received an audio file 2 nights ago. In it, you instruct your wife to tamper with MS, Sandoval's prescription medication to induce confusion. Adriana broke, hands over her face, shoulders shaking. But Scott shot to his feet, pointing at the detective. That recording is illegal. In New Mexico, Naomi said coldly, one-party consent is fully legal. Ms. Sandoval was the consenting party. The room went silent. Scott looked between them, Teresa, Adriana, the attorney, the detective, as the walls closed in. Then the front door opened without ceremony. A woman stood in the doorway, holding a child on one hip, another gripping her coat. Bianca Flores. She looked confused, worried, exhausted. Scott, you weren't answering your phone. The kids haven't seen you in days, and... Her sentence died when she saw Teresa. Then Adriana. Then the detective. Scott, she whispered, voice trembling, what's going on? Scott's face collapsed. Bianca, go home. I told you not to come here. But Bianca shook her head, slowly eyes filling. You said you were separated. You said the divorce papers were almost done. You said she pointed at Adriana, was the one who cheated on you. Adriana made a broken sound. What? Miguel exchanged a glance with Naomi. The unraveling was complete. Bianca took a step toward Scott, betrayal turning her face hollow. Was any of it true? Any of it? Scott exploded. Bianca, stop. You're making this worse. Naomi stepped forward, her voice firm and final. Mr. Rudd, you are under arrest. As if on cue, 2 uniformed officers entered through the open door. They moved with quiet precision, reading Scott his rights, while handcuffs clicked into place. Charges were listed one by one. Elder exploitation, financial fraud, forcible entry, forgery, conspiracy to commit unlawful guardianship, theft of personal property, and attempted medication tampering. The children began to cry softly. Bianca held them close, tears slipping down her own cheeks. Adriana sat motionless, staring at the man she thought she knew as he was led toward the door. Scott twisted back toward Teresa with a final snarl. You think you've won? You pathetic old woman. Miguel stepped forward, blocking him. Enough. The officers pulled Scott outside, his voice fading into the evening air. Inside the house, grief, shock, and justice hung in the silence, like dust motes catching the last of the daylight. It wasn't over yet, but the power had shifted, and everyone in the room felt it. 6 months passed like a slow, steady exhale. Winter melted into a gentle New Mexico spring, and with it came a version of Teresa Sandoval she hadn't seen in years, lighter, clearer, quietly stronger. The legal storm had finally settled. Scott remained behind bars awaiting trial, restitution orders were in process, and Teresa's accounts, once at risk, were secure again. What remained now was healing. Adriana kept her distance at first. Therapy sessions, recommended by Detective Harper and encouraged by Miguel, became her weekly anchor. She moved into a small apartment across town, alone for the first time since she married Scott. Her visits to Teresa were cautious, shy, hesitant, but always sincere. She brought groceries sometimes, or flowers, or simply her presence, sitting at the kitchen table in silence before whispering, "I'm trying, Mom." Teresa always answered gently, "I know." There was remorse in Adriana's eyes that no apology could fully express, but healing was not about absolution. It was about truth finally taking root. Teresa let their conversations be simple, small steps, safe steps. Surprisingly, one of the brightest threads of Teresa's new life came from the woman she had once assumed was part of Scott's betrayal, Bianca. They met again 2 weeks after the arrest, this time without tension or chaos. Bianca had arrived with her children, Elena, 7, and Mateo, 4, holding a small basket of homemade empanadas. "I didn't know where else to bring these," she said softly, "but I wanted to say thank you for exposing everything." Teresa hugged her unprompted. None of us deserved what he did. From then on, Sundays became their shared ritual. Sometimes they met at Roosevelt Park with picnic blankets and juice boxes. Sometimes Bianca came over for coffee, the kids toddling through Teresa's garden chasing lizards. Mateo had quickly declared Teresa Nana T, and though the nickname startled her at first, it warmed her in places she hadn't known were still cold. The neighborhood, too, shifted around her. People she had known casually for years now greeted her with a softness that came from understanding the storm she'd weathered. Some brought casseroles, others offered rides. The Sandoval house became, once again, a place where lights glowed warmly in the evening rather than flickered with anxiety. And inside those walls, Teresa found herself again. She replanted her herb garden. She restored the knitted blankets she once tucked away, fearing someone might label them signs of hoarding. Her home was no longer a battleground of hidden recorders, misplaced belongings, or whispered fear. It felt lived in, safe, hers. Financial restitution from Scott's case allowed her to replace stolen jewelry, repair the old roof, and even fund a small college savings account for Bianca's children, an act Miguel called quiet justice. Teresa simply called it choosing life. Every month, she attended a local support circle for older adults recovering from financial exploitation. She didn't share her whole story, not yet, but she listened. In listening, she found pieces of courage she didn't know she still had. Slowly the shadows receded. One warm evening, as the sun dipped behind the Sandia Mountains, Teresa stood in her bedroom, choosing outfits for a trip she had once thought she'd never dare take again. She laid a new sundress across the bed, beside a sturdy pair of sandals and the fresh passport that replaced the one she'd forgotten 6 months earlier, the very mistake that had saved her life. Her suitcase was half-packed. A cruise itinerary lay on the dresser, bright with promise. This time, she wasn't running away from something. She was walking toward something new. Before closing the zipper, she paused by the window. Golden light washed over the adobe walls outside, turning the whole backyard into a soft, glowing memory. She thought of her husband, his laugh, his steady advice, his belief in her resilience. She thought of Adriana, broken but rebuilding. She thought of Bianca and the children, whose unexpected place in her life felt like a small, tender miracle. Most of all, she thought of herself, not the frightened woman who once hid in her own home, whispering into recorders, but the woman who stood here now, a survivor, a protector, a reclaimed force. Teresa closed her suitcase gently and walked toward the door. Her victory wasn't loud. It wasn't vengeful. It didn't need to be. It was quiet, mature, deeply earned, a life reclaimed in full, beneath a New Mexico sunset that finally felt like home.